Hi, everybody. Bill Kenny here with Meet. I hope you're doing well today, and thank you for joining us for A/B testing to validate your trade show and in-person event strategy. It's a real pleasure to be with you today. This topic has been one that we've been hearing from people that they're really sort of challenged to figure out the basic things, right? The idea of who our target is, what events we should go to or where we should go to find them, and then what's the offer? How do we engage them? What's something compelling that will allow us to connect with those key people? And so we've got a great crowd today. We actually have people from all over the world joining us. I know there are folks certainly from the US and a bunch from Europe and Asia and the Middle East, and I think one or two from South America. So going to be a lot of fun today, and please share your questions with us as well in the comment area, and thank you to those who pre-submitted questions as well. I'm going to switch over now to my slides, and if you haven't been on our webinars before, we'll go to slides for a bit, share some key piece of information with you, and then I'll come back on screen and we'll do the Q&A, both with the pre-submitted questions and any additional ones that are submitted. So let me go over to my slides, and there we are. So we should be projecting now. I'm just going to go into presentation mode here. And so again, our goal is to talk about A/B testing, how to validate your trade show and in-person event strategy. So ultimately, it's all about testing hypothesis. You know, it's funny, we all sit in meetings where, endless meetings, where people talk about their hypothesis, what they think about whether it's who we should be targeting, whether it's what our value proposition is, or the offer we're going to make, or countless other things. And we waste so much time talking about it sort of hypothetically, and ultimately we can talk all we want. What we need to do is validate. And so I think, you know, the way to shorten up meetings is just to accept what everyone is saying in terms of their hypothesis and say, that's a great idea, let's test it. And so then it's really a matter of how do we incorporate testing into our events, into our strategy, so that we are able to understand very specifically what's working and what isn't. And it's interesting. I think, you know, the internet has sort of led us into this. Companies like HubSpot and whatnot with inbound marketing have helped a lot in terms of understanding this. But as we go through this, I think you'll see that events are actually, particularly for business to business companies, but truly for any company, are really the best platform to be able to do really strong testing, and I think very competitive, and maybe even better in some respects than what you can do online. And we'll talk about that. So here are the submitted questions that we got ahead of time, and certainly, again, use the comment section on your on YouTube to add additional questions for us as we go. And I'm certainly happy to answer any questions that come up. So our agenda is simple. We want to understand and kind of get into how to define our best targets. We want to talk about A/B testing, and then talk about some specific trade show techniques, and then applying the numbers to improve results. So how do we use the numbers that come out of our testing to change what we're doing? And then again, of course, getting to your questions. So just so you know a little bit about me and a little bit about Meet, it's probably good to have context for my comments. So I'm the founder and client advocate of Meet, and personally I've had more than 30 years of business-to-business sales and marketing experience, more of that in sales, but maybe specifically to events and trade shows. I've done everything from been an exhibitor, and I'm still an exhibitor quite often for our own company. I've also run trade shows, and then in the last 5 years spent much more time helping other companies perform well at trade shows. And our focus is all in the B2B arena. And particularly a great deal of our effort now is working with international companies that are looking to soft land and scale in the US. So helping them enter and identify the best buyer personas here, the best buyers, the value proposition that resonate with them, and then of course what bait or offer will attract them into the marketing funnel, and ideally to a place where they agree to a meeting and become a new customer. And so our service sort of is on 4 pillars. We do quite a bit of strategy. That's probably roughly half of our work. And then staffing will actually go and fully execute the trade show strategy. There are a few of our clients aren't even in the US yet, but we're helping them establish that beachhead and we're their presence here. We help executives get speaking opportunities as a part of our service, and then also do a bunch of sales support like appointment setting and whatnot to help the salespeople make sure that they're productive at trade shows and events as well. So yeah, it's sometimes we're in the wrong fishing hole, and we could probably have our line in this puddle all day long, but it may not be a very productive place to catch fish. So really, what we're going to focus on today is how do we get our hook and bait in the right body of water to catch the target fish. So let's talk about fishing now that we're kind of on that topic. And fishing is really one of the coolest metaphors for what we're going to talk about, because fish, when you talk to people that fish, and I do this quite frequently, is, there are really 3 questions that they need to answer before they go fishing. But sort of once they've decided to go fishing, the 3 questions that they answer, and they go generally in this order, is what do I want to catch? Then where am I going to go fishing? Because obviously a good fisherman or fisherwoman is going to go fishing where the fish they want to catch are. And that's not just the body of water. It's going to be the depth and the time of day. And there are a lot of specifics around how fishermen or fisherwomen go fishing and where they go. And then finally, what bait am I going to put in the water that will attract that fish? And if you know any fisherman or you're one yourself, you know that most good people that fish or successful people that fish don't generally go with just one bait. They'll go with multiple types of bait so that they figure out what this particular fish in this particular area on this particular day are attracted to. And the goal of that bait is only to attract that target fish. It's not to attract any other fish. So it's got to be really specific. And so let's talk about how tough that question, that first question that people that fish answer is. So when someone that fishes says, this is what I want to catch, well, just so you have a sense, there are 20,000 species of fish in the world. This document or this slide just shows the freshwater fish of the Americas. So that's what's in our lakes and streams and ponds. That's not including the oceans, which are umpteen more, but there are 20,000 species of fish in the world, and then umpteen more subspecies. So let's even just probably underestimate here and say there are 100,000 species and subspecies of fish in the world. So somebody that goes fishing goes from 100,000 down to 1. In other words, they eliminate 99,999 prospects, or let's even call them suspects, and they only have 1 prospect. That's what they go out fishing for, and they identify where that fish is going to be, and they identify the bait that fish will be attracted to. If you understand that, you can probably hang up, because that's really the essence of what we're going to talk about. And obviously there is a lot of technique to this, but when we go out A/B testing, it's to figure these things out. And when we not just have a hypothesis around this, but when we know the answers to these questions and empirically know them, then our marketing changes. And when we get this right, it's so cool because not only does our marketing at events change, but our marketing collateral changes, what's on our website changes, how the salespeople communicate changes. All the communication we're doing, all the sales and marketing communication completely evolves to a much higher level and a much more successful level because we're targeting the right fish and we're doing that in the right mediums with the right message that creates the outcomes and the conversion that we want. So we talked about these first three questions. What do they want to catch? Where will they fish? And then what will they use for bait? Really that simple. So understanding your best targets. And if we're going to be friends, we need to come to an agreement. And we need to agree on how do we identify, when we say best target, we're really saying prospect. And what we tend to find as we work with companies is that it's very natural to have what we might call prospect creep. In other words, because we don't want to eliminate the possibility of selling to someone, we tend to let what we define as a prospect expand. And sometimes they're on the American diet, they're bloated, and they're they're obscene. We have an obscenely wide net we're casting. And of course, if we want to catch one of 100,000 fish, we're gonna be really specific, and we're gonna use tactics that will catch that fish because that's what we're aiming for. So in order to, we need to, before we sort of proceed, agree on what a prospect is, and we've found that a prospect has these three attributes. One is they have a need, and that means they have a gap in terms of sort of where they are from where they want to be. And this could be in a variety of ways, but they have a need. And this is from their perspective. They need to perceive they have a need. They have money or the resource to satisfy that need. And then finally, they need to be urgent. So the easiest way to think of this is need money now. It's sort of the simple way to think about it and continue to remind yourself on what a prospect is and what a prospect is not. If someone you meet has a need and they have money, but they're not urgent, they're not a prospect. Likewise, if they have money and they seem urgent, but they don't have a need, at least that they perceive, then they're not urgent, or that they're not a prospect. And urgent is certainly a critical variable because you can imagine any of these without urgent is key. And we see that all the time. And part of what we've kind of come to as we talk to people is we find if what we're offering isn't in someone's top 3 list in terms of what they're trying to solve, then they're currently not a prospect and we should move on. And they may be a prospect in a month or a year or 10 years, but they're not a prospect today. And sales and prospecting are going to be much more efficient when it identifies prospects today, because otherwise our pipeline gets clogged up and we end up wasting lots of time with people that aren't prospects. And it's sort of a false metric. We've got this wonderful pipeline with all these companies in it that they grow hair and they die and they stall out there. And obviously that's not productive. So really key. So about trade shows, I'm going to share just a couple of high level thoughts here, very simple, again, sort of to frame where we're going. So trade shows, and we get asked all the time, sort of, are trade shows still relevant? So the thing to think about is in business to business sales, the outcome we want from the marketing team or the marketing side is to get face to face with a prospect. So most marketing dollars are spent towards getting face to face with a prospect. Those prospects are at trade shows. The issue we have is that the prospects aren't labeled. So it's hard to find the 1 in 100,000 or 1 in 100 that we want to, have a need, have money, and are urgent. And so we need to develop processes, just like the person who fishes does. They go to the right body of water and they put the right bait in the water. They're not under the water yelling at the fish. They're not chasing them down the aisle. That fish is opting and that fish is choosing to bite on the hook because of the bait that exists. And so we need to develop the same technique, because the prospect that opts in to the right bait, or we should say the suspect that opts into the right bait, is a prospect. And so doing that is qualifying as well as creating activity. And so the purpose of an individual trade show, very simply, is to identify and connect to volumes of quality prospects. So we want to do that. And so the booth, I'm sorry, well, I'm just going to skip one slide. So the purpose of the booth is to identify and enroll those prospects. And so if we keep it simple, the trade show itself is to get volumes of quality prospects. The booth itself is the real purpose, and why we want to use that booth is to convert those sort of general attendees, those that are appropriate, into prospects. And so when we build an annual strategy, it's really about how do we sort of lay the show schedule out or the event schedule out so that it's a steady stream of prospects. We don't want a whole lot in the first quarter and none in the second quarter, that type of thing. There needs to be good balance as well. So now let's get into talking about A/B testing and get specific about kind of what we want to see happen here. So as I started with, this process all starts with a guess, an assumption, a hypothesis. And so again, you may really shorten meetings quite a bit by accepting everybody's guesses, assumptions, and hypotheses, and identifying them as such. You might get input and get 3 or 4 opinions. You might, some of the partners might share an opinion. Some of the owners might share an opinion. Some of the salespeople might share an opinion. Whomever, it's all great. Bring it on, and let's sort of put these together in a logical sequence so that we can test them. There's no bad idea here. And so we want to make sure that we, and we'll put them in some kind of likelihood and priority order, but they should, any idea should be on our list. And it, again, will shorten the discussion. We don't need to be the smartest person in the room. This should all be, the decisions we make should all be based on data. So the things that make a great hypothesis, number one is it's testable. It addresses some kind of conversion barrier, and it aims at gaining some kind of a market insight. So making sure that when we have a hypothesis that it's testable and it's getting at that conversion barrier, and it will give us new insights, and really key. And so when we get into A/B testing, and it may be A/B/C/D testing, but ultimately we want to make sure that we do things that will move the needle for us, and and make our marketing and sales much more effective. So hypotheses stem from problems, and those are problems that we perceive either that our solution offers or solves, or problems that our customer has. And so again, these assumptions are unvalidated until we define a process and implement a process to validate them. So again, collect all the ideas. You have someone over here has an idea, the next person has an idea, and just all ideas are good. And again, that will really shorten the conversations. So we found that events are really ideal for this. So many of us are familiar with inbound marketing, where online, there's some, as you go to websites, there's some enticement to have you identify yourself. And this usually comes around access to white papers or assessments or a variety of articles and how-tos and help manuals and all sorts of things like that have become sort of the norm. And the problem is with online is you really don't know why someone is either attracted or not attracted to your offer. So one of the cool things that can happen in an event, and let's just assume for the moment that our offer today in the booth is that we have a webinar next week that we've identified as an important topic for our prospect, for a person who has a need, who has money, and who's urgent for a solution we offer. So we've identified we believe is keeping them awake at night. And this webinar has a title that's provocative to that topic. And so when someone comes to our booth and we say, gosh, we're running this webinar next week, is this a topic that you're interested in? And the person leans in and says, oh my goodness, yes. How do I sign up? As we're enrolling them in that, it's so cool because we can ask them, can you tell me why this particular topic is so important for you right now? And this allows them an opportunity to share that story with us. Now, that story will become so powerful in our future marketing and maybe even our communication to others that day. But the more we have sort of stories from the field, the better we're going to operate as marketers. And so being able to ask why will lead us into understanding value proposition much better. We'll have much better terms. We'll be able to communicate in the language that our prospect uses as opposed to the language that we use. And maybe the metaphor here is, I don't know if any of you travel much internationally. I tend to do a bit. And so I very quickly show my ignorance as an American. I speak one language, it's English, and I don't even speak it really all that well. But my challenge is when I go to restaurants in countries where English is not the language of choice, and I'm ordering a meal. If somebody, the waiter or waitress I'm working with doesn't understand what I'm saying, my immediate response is to speak louder, which of course just underscores my absolute ignorance as a communicator. We have to learn how to speak to people in their own language if we want to communicate. And so making sure that our marketing communication uses the language of our audience is really powerful. And so getting the stories of why this is important to that person right now is incredibly informative. It's helping us communicate much more effectively to more of the fish we're trying to catch or of that prospect. So conversely, if somebody comes to our booth and we make the offer and they say, gosh, no, that's not, I'm not interested, and they continue walking by or they're making that motion, we can ask, so that's really interesting. What is keeping you awake at night? What are the big issues that you're dealing with? And we appreciate that this isn't, and certainly that's not appropriate, but is there something that's more compelling to you from a standpoint of moving your business to the next level? And so again, we have this opportunity to get this wonderful open-ended level of information from someone. And what they're really challenged by may also be something that we solve. It's just we didn't have an offer related to that. So that will potentially inform future offers of other things that we could do. It could be everything from we have a solution there and we need, at some point we'll incorporate an offer related to that, or we don't have a solution there. But if this person is a buyer that we are targeting and they have a problem that we haven't yet realized, that is informative. And so again, we have the opportunity in person to do things that you can never do online and can be really, really high impact. So things that we can do specifically in trade shows that are pretty interesting. So when we're looking for ideal events, the kind of the normal thing that we see organizations do is they will go whether it's enter a market or enter the US, they identify the big event in their industry. If you're in, health tech, you might go to bio. There are so many sort of marquee events that are in each industry, and so the challenge of that from a learning standpoint is there's only one of those or two or three of those large events in any industry in a given year, whether they're national or global events. And so the amount of feedback we're going to get is going to be very limited. And so when you're entering a market, sure, traction's important, but I promise you, you cannot prosecute the number of leads if you execute an event, a massive event that, whether it's CES with, hundreds of thousands of people at it, or bio with hundreds of thousands of people. Small companies can't address all those prospects. So it's exceptionally inefficient to go to those events and to do, and besides the expense, both in terms of time and money, to do the amount of learning that we want to do, we need to go to events that are local and regional, that are the same audience. Because if you're not in the U.S., one of the things that that's maybe somewhat unique to here is, most of the large organizations that run the national and global events have local and regional affiliates who are doing their own events. They may have weekly or monthly, whether they're dinners or meetups or tabletop expos. There are all sorts of forms that these events take. But if we identify the fish we want to catch, then finding some places, we don't need to go to the ocean. Maybe we can go to a small bay and begin to learn and do that in a way that will be much more time and cost efficient, where we can more than likely sleep in our own bed at night, and also get a lot accomplished. So we can get some early customers, yes, absolutely, and that's important. But more importantly is we can build the sales and marketing system, and so that we create very efficient and repeatable sales, which help us scale in whatever we're doing. So identifying and it's great. And I'm not saying don't go to the national events or the global stuff, but if you don't, sort of early on have a rich schedule of local and regional events, you're going to be missing out on the opportunity to do a much higher frequency of learning, where we can both evolve sort of all of our focus, but also all of our communication, written, oral, and otherwise. And so making sure that we incorporate that in is really, really important. So this is all about finding sort of cheap and frequent access to our audience. Again, we're going to pay tens, if not even up towards $100,000 to participate in these, sort of massive global and national events where, for the cost of dinner, we can go and be in front of a much smaller set of that same prospect. And just much more efficient to be able to do that. And when we then end up going to the national events, we're going to be so much more effective because we've really honed down who we're aiming at. And as we go to an event with, whether it's 10,000 or 100,000 or more attendees, we've identified the 1% or the fraction of a percent of people that we're aiming at and the specific message for them. Again, 20,000 species of fish, 100,000 species and subspecies, roughly. We want to find the 1 in 100,000 that we're targeting. And so really, really important that we get focused. So there are only 3 variables in this process. It's going to be, who do we want to catch, sort of when and where, which is sort of the event, and then what, the bait we're going to put in the water. And so we want to be careful when we're A/B testing that we're testing one thing at a time, because otherwise we can skew our results. And so you're sort of making sure that you decide going into an event, what is it we're aiming to learn by the end of this, and which variable is it that we're sort of going to be addressing. And it may be that we're able to A/B test within an event, or ABCD test within an event, or it may be an A test at this event, a B test at this event, a C test at this event, and a D test at another event, all with the same, keeping 2 of the 3 variables constant, and the third variable would be the one that's changing. I would suggest you want to probably address them in as much as you can in this order. So who informs when and where and what. And so if we get who right, then it really narrows down when and where we're going, and then what bait we're going to put in the water. It doesn't answer the question fully, but it really shortens the amount of tests we need to. And again, we can always go back and recheck our who, because who will evolve as our product matures. Who will definitely evolve, and as we introduce new products, the who will keep coming back to, but it's the first one to answer because it helps create much more efficiency in the when, where, and what. So some of you may be familiar with the business model canvas. Hopefully all of you are, but just in case you aren't, this is a document that came out, it's probably 15 years ago now. And the whole idea of the business model canvas is to essentially put a business plan on one page. And it's meant to articulate all of the sort of 9 variables that the author identified in terms of what does a business need to consider to not just enter, but scale in a market. And it's hard to perceive that this is an entire business plan on a page. And that's kind of what's daunting about it, is that it truly is a whole business plan. And this, 20 years ago was a 30 to 50 page document. And this document essentially replaces it, or at least summarizes it. And so there's a real challenge, though, for those that use this as sort of their core process to be able to make and develop their go-to-market and marketing decisions. We found that it really is, it can be unfocusing for companies. And so we're going to suggest that we actually really narrow down the business model canvas. And for those that aren't familiar with it, there are great videos online. Please watch a video on it. It's an incredibly powerful tool. Obviously, there's a limit to how much we can get into the depth of it on this call, and maybe we'll do a future call on the business model canvas. But really, the ones as marketers we need to be most focused on, and we should not look at another one of the boxes or another one of the sections until we've answered these 2 things. And we have clients who are mature companies, have been in business 20 plus years, are in 80 countries, and they can't well answer these questions. And they can, but their marketing doesn't show that they do, and that they know this information, because they're way too wide in their marketing. And so the 2 questions or 2 segments we really need to focus on are customer segment. In other words, who are we selling to? And then what's the value proposition that resonates with that customer? And so and this kind of goes back to what we've been talking about, is we've got sort of 3 things we're deciding. It's sort of who we're aiming at, where they are, and then what it is that attracts them. And so this answers 2 of the 3: who we're aiming at, customer segments, and then value proposition, what attracts them. And ultimately, we're going to take that one step further to identify the bait that sort of brings them in. But the value proposition, and where I see a lot of companies getting confused here, is quite often the value proposition, if there is one, is articulated from the seller's point of view. Value propositions should always be articulated from the buyer's point of view. And so how do you learn that? Is you have to ask your buyers, or your best buyers, questions. You have to become much more intimate with them. And when we know that, then we can reflect it back to future buyers, in other words, prospects. But the more we can understand, the better. So if we were going to do a persona test, we would assume or create a hypothesis around 2, 3, 4 personas. In other words, estimates of what our ideal buyer looks like. And we may say, our best buyer is an industrial manufacturer that is in a certain range in terms of size or revenue. The persona is the purchasing manager or a line manager with these concerns and attributes. But there's tons of information. We've done some webinars on defining your buyer persona, but you want to have 2 or 3, maybe 4 in a given category. You might have a few different types of people you sell to, or personas, or 2 or 3 or 4 that you think are the ones you should be selling to. Ultimately, you're going to test hypothetical or value propositions that you're estimating with those buyer personas and various offers, and you're going to measure their response. And so you're incrementally improving these. So as we test what we think are the right value propositions and offers for specific personas, then we're going to record how many opted in versus not. And then, we'll continue to sort of, as we learn, make our personas more tight and more specific. And then, of course, the value propositions and the offers will get more specific as well. But ideally, through that process, we're going to be able to find, if we're testing, say, 4 different personas, we can find the 1 or 2 that are most productive, and then really go much deeper in terms of value proposition and offer response testing. So again, there's going to be levels and layers of this as we're doing it. And part of this is really kind of understanding bait as we're going to events. And so we're going to use various techniques. We could change the offer that we're making from the morning at an event to the afternoon. So for example, if it's a it's sort of a local and regional conference and maybe they have tabletop exhibits and it's a 1-day or 2-day event, quite often they'll break for lunch and they'll go in and listen to a keynote type person speak. Well, you can fully change out your booth in that hour that people are off the trade show floor. So from the AM, where you might be testing one offer, one piece of bait, in the afternoon, you could be testing a totally different bait and an offer for that prospect. And ultimately, your prospect is constant and your value proposition is constant. What you're changing is the offer. And so making sure that the offer and that we've got good ways to count the number of people that opt into the offer in the morning versus the afternoon. We can also test this day to day. So, it might be 1 day to the next. It also could be 1 event to the next. And so, again, as long as we're reasonably confident that the audience is somewhat consistent from event to event, then the event to event statistics can be reliable, and we can always confirm that. We can do additional events to confirm what we think our results were, so that we're not taking false positives or false negatives. And so the normal offers in B2B are webinars, assessments, consultations, but there are tons of others that can be selected from. And so I think ultimately the most important thing is to identify what's keeping, let's assume you've got a target buyer persona and that you're confident in that, or it's one that is a hypothesis that you've kind of mapped out. Then really what you want to find out, and the most important thing, is what's keeping that person awake at night. So you found that, sort of manufacturing plant manager who has 100 employees, they're in the aerospace sector, whatever other attributes, but understanding what keeps them awake at night. Whatever you offer should be something that will help them get better sleep. And so, what is it? And so, it's not going to be a sleeping pill. It's going to be something that eases their mind, makes their work better, more productive, in some way, helps them solve that problem. And it may be just the offer may be just knowledge or information. And when you think of what we're trying to do here, as marketers, what we're trying to do is take people from the very earliest stage of awareness. So in other words, they've just found out about us, and we want to navigate them through from awareness through some level of intimacy where they begin building trust with us, down to a place where they feel strong enough trust to to accept an appointment with us and to allow us to meet and have an appointment. And so, that quite often doesn't happen on the first interaction. So there's got to be a process here, and we want to be able to test what gets our best buyer in so that we can put them in that lead nurturing process to get them through to that place where they've agreed to an appointment. And so that's a great segue to sort of how do we use the numbers to improve the results. So I'm going to share in there, again, these are just a couple of examples of how we might use the numbers, but this will help, I think. So we can look at sort of comparing event to event. So this would be, so we've talked about sort of measuring the persona. We've talked about measuring the bait. Now let's look at another application of the numbers. And this would, again, we can use the same technique to measure and validate the persona as well as measure and validate the bait. But this particular example is one where, let's say through the course of the year, we go to 8 events. So we've got event XYZ, and we go all the way down to the last one, event red. And these are just, sort of hypothetical event names. And we've recorded what our lead generation was at these events, what our cost per appointment was, how much revenue we generated from that, what our cost per dollar of revenue was, or we could even have a percentage there. But ultimately, the idea here is, and so, the thing to think about when we're thinking about how do we measure this stuff and how do we use it effectively is ultimately, a lot of people want to measure revenue generated and associate that with events. The challenge is, and some reflected this in the questions that they offered, was that the sales cycle is so long that revenue generation is often difficult, right? If it's a 12 or 24-month sales funnel to close, or even 6 months, that's an awfully long time to wait to know how an event produced for you. Well, an indicator of sales closed is certainly going to be appointments scheduled, because we know there's a certain number of appointments that we need in order to create closed business. And that's just a simple ratio, right? And if we measure it, I mean, we do this a lot for clients, is, sort of how many, in order to get a sale, how many proposals do you have to give? And in order to give a proposal, how many appointments do you need to have with the specific buyer and overall? And then once we know how many appointments, then we know, then we want to know how many people that we need to interact with at a trade show in order to create an appointment, or how many people need to come to our webinars or whatnot in order to convert to an appointment. And so when we look at appointments, when you think about it, if you just measure the appointment set specific that can be attributed to an event, either we would normally look at it either 30 or 60 days post-event. 30 days is probably fine, but if you are able to measure that, the cool thing is within 30 days of each event, you can calculate the event's value. And so you can begin using that number to be able to make event decisions. So imagine this. So we've got now the cost per appointment in ascending or descending order. I'm sorry, ascending order. So the cost goes up as this goes down. And so if cost per appointment is our measure, which I would advocate strongly for B2B companies, that cost per appointment is really the best measure of event success. And so or even the raw number of appointments generated, depending on kind of what's important in the organization. But the cool thing here is we can go back to all of these event organizers throughout the year and share with them where their event measures relative to all the other events that we do, because our job is to, it's, number one is to perform well, but even more important is to continually perform better. So we want to bring the event host organizer on board as an ally in that process. And let's just imagine that we're speaking with a person who is maybe number 7 here, event A, B, C, and we share with them, hey, you're about double our, in terms of the cost per appointment than our mid-tier company is. Actually, you're a little bit more. If you average 4 and 5, they are more than double the cost per appointment of the mid-tier companies. What do we need to do to get you at least to the mid-tier here? We, where you are right now, you're going to be eliminated. So we want to help you, and there's really only 2 things that they can do that changes, but that could make dramatic differences. Number one is they could add in value. So a better location, additional promotional opportunities, all sorts of things. And the other is they could reduce the cost, both of which are great answers. All you care about is this ratio, the cost per appointment. So again, if we can work with our sales team to know when people who we've identified at events or through our marketing convert to accepting an appointment, that can be a very consistent and fast way to know, and a real leading indicator of business closed. And again, that's just a simple ratio. So take a look at that. We found it to be really, really informative and very good. So that was sort of looking at a year's worth of events and sort of making decisions based on that. Another way, and events are A, B, and then in this case, A, B, C, D, E, F tested. We had 8 events. We could also do year-to-year comparisons. So how the event evolved over 4 years in terms of its production for us. So again, looking at cost per appointment and which years were most effective. Thankfully, the most current year so far was the best performer, but that could be a totally different story. But understanding that will help us make decisions and certainly work with the host so that we're utilizing their event as well as possible. It's, events are a lot like having a gym membership. The host or the organizer, puts all the equipment there and, creates all the resources, but it's up to us to exercise. And so how we use the event is really key, because that will really change our results. So when we're applying this to, to making offers, when we're A/B testing, obviously we can use the same, number that converted to appointments from if we're A/B testing from A in the morning, B in the afternoon, we can look at the raw number connected to people that accepted the offer in the morning and the afternoon. We can also look at, 15, 30 or 60 days later, we can look at the number of those that converted to appointments and sort of even better improve our knowledge around the value of those interactions. We should be continually each month sort of evolving the things that we're testing so that our ability to not just communicate better at events and convert better at events, but convert better at all of our modes of media improves. So we started with this idea of testing a hypothesis. Again, the goal is really to get through as many of these hypotheses as efficiently as we can and expediently as we can, because ultimately we want to be very confident when we're investing our marketing resources and our sales resources into developing customers. And so there's a kind of an old adage that probably many have heard, and that is that sort of one marketing professional talking to the CEO of their company, and the boss says, "Hey, how's it going?" And the marketing person says, "Hey, we found out that 50% of our marketing dollars are wasted." And the CEO, of course, says, "What?" And the marketing person comes back and says, yeah, unfortunately, we don't know which 50%. So using testing really helps us not just learn, but really implement policies and processes that make our marketing much more efficient. You know, the biggest anti-sponsor of trade shows and events are salespeople, simply because the leads that they get do not represent prospects. These are not, more often than not, they're not people who have a need, have money, and are urgent, because the bait that's being offered in the booth isn't something that's finding prospects. It's finding an average attendee, right? If we give away an iPad, that's not aimed at a prospect unless you sell iPads. And so we always need to have bait that is something that our prospect wants. So let's hop over to questions. We've got about 10 minutes left. So this is working out well. And I'm going to come back on screen here. This should just take a second. And where am I? Right here. Okay. Now I can see me, which means you probably saw me 5 minutes ago. But anyway, so let's go to your questions. This has been really good. Hopefully it's been helpful for you. Actually, one thing I would mention too off the top before we get into questions is our next webinar. We actually have two in May, and they're both aimed at folks who are coming to what's called Select USA, which is a massive event in Washington, D.C. for companies that are entering the U.S. The webinar is open to anyone, though, so if you may find that the content, whether you're going to Select USA or not, is important. It will help with any kind of event participation. So the first is setting the table, creating your Select USA success plan. So again, insert your event here. This, we'll be talking specifically about Select USA, but this will apply to all. And then the second one, May 14th, will be assembling your Select USA toolkit. And again, this will be talking about things like developing your value proposition, developing your call to action, and so on. And so it'll be things that we talked about today, but really starting with the draft that we're going to then go out and test. So this is sort of we're going backwards. This is after you have those, whether it's the value prop or your self-introduction or any of that stuff. What we're talking about now is the next level, which is we have that. Now we're going to go out and test it. So let's get into our questions. So so the first actually isn't a question, so I'm going to skip that. Let's see. So the first question here: can you compare A/B testing results across multiple shows of similar personas? Absolutely. We just showed that. So we showed the 8 events through the course of the year. That's testing showing the results, and we could record what was tested at those various events as well to be able to take that further. That particular chart was developed to talk to trade show hosts, so they didn't necessarily need to know that we were testing different things. What they needed to know was the production of their particular event, which, of course, to some degree, could be driven on how we performed at the event, but again, a different purpose. So yes, we can absolutely test similar personas across multiple events. And we would probably choose to change our offer to be able to test what those personas responded to. Let's see, how can we, or how to A/B test against potential clients when there's so many variables such as long sales cycle. Yeah, and it's kind of what I said a couple minutes ago. Again, the normal here is to measure revenue and sort of sales made in what was caused them to convert, essentially. So sales made against a base of clients. We would suggest that it's nice to measure that, and please do associate your sales with how clients came in. I think part of the problem today too is that it's sometimes hard to assign where a client came from, because they may have had multiple marketing touches, what actually caused them to convert to an appointment and then to a sale. But it's much easier to know what converted them to an appointment, I think, primarily because they're so close together, right? The event and the first appointment should be within a few weeks of each other. So I would suggest sort of, simplifying how you look to measure. Most companies aren't set up to measure well until close. And measuring until appointment is much easier. And really for that first 30 days, that's really works very well. So I would definitely reduce the variables in measurement quite a bit. Next question, how to best develop a compelling value proposition and make a sale. So certainly for the specifics, please come to our workshop on May 14th, which we're going to talk specifically about that. But to give you a high level view of developing a valuable value proposition, first is identify be confident in who you're selling to. And then if you have some of those that are currently customers or clients, ask them, why did they buy from you? What was it? What was the promise they were hoping would be fulfilled when they first started doing business with you? And that's sort of your gateway value proposition. And of course, you can wordsmith it and whatnot, and you want to get input from a few like customers before you sort of narrow that down. But having it from the customer's voice is really critically important because it's ultimately it's how your customers communicate. It's the terms and words they resonate with. It's truly what's keeping them awake at night. So all important. Next is, we are a consulting firm and have struggled coming up with a compelling and worthwhile offer in a trade show scenario. Free consultation is overdone. And our government prospects are turned off by free anything. Sure, yeah. And so, yeah, anything general like that is difficult because I would say you're casting way, way, way too wide a net. Your buyer who has a need, money, and is urgent is, in any event you go to, is a very small minority of that group. So you want to think about what will separate that small minority from the majority. So it may be 1 in 100, it may be 1 in 1,000 that are walking through that event. It may be 1 in 5,000. And so, at the end of the day, it may be 15, it may be, maybe a couple hundred at any given show that have need, money, and are urgent. So what is it that what's the call to action or offer that those specific buyers will swim to? And so that really the difference here is that the normal that we see is that most people have somebody in the aisle in their trade events that is a barker, right? They're out there and they're trying to get people into the booth to have a conversation. Really, all we want to do, and this is, booth layout is key, is everything that's not the offer in the booth sort of takes away from the offer. So people always ask, should we have pens in the booth? Should we have, these promotional materials? And all you want to do is the booth's job is done when you've identified who in the event is a prospect. You don't need to do anything with them at the event. You just want to figure out which subset of these people are prospects. And it's much like the resume. Resumes, I think people are often confused by resumes. Is, you see these folks with like a 5-page resume. The resume's only job is to get somebody to call you to set up an appointment to meet. That's called an interview. That's a lot of what we want in the booth. You kind of throw away the resume once you have the interview. I mean, it may be a reference, but for the most part, it gets tossed out. And so I think that's the same thing here, is we want to keep our approach so specific. Again, we want to put the bait in the water that only our fish is attracted to, and all the other fish, all the 19,999 species of fish that we're not aiming for, all swim by, plus all the subspecies as well. There was another question on building a compelling value proposition, so hopefully address that. I have the next question is, I have doubts always about pricing and content we have for selling. Again, you can test that. You can A/B test pricing. If you're selling at trade shows, you certainly can test that. You can certainly test pricing otherwise. You can, use various offers at through your marketing to test pricing, and certainly content as well. There are a lot of ways to test content through events, but ultimately, using A/B testing for that. So test, and often it's not even the content as much as it is the titles. So whether it's what you call your assessment, or the title of the assessment, assessing for X or Y, or the title of some provocative webinar, A/B testing titles of webinars or whatever your offer is. The offer may be exactly the same. In other words, everything past the title may be exactly the same, but testing ABC, testing different titles will tell you what your buyers respond to. It may have nothing at all to do with the content. It may be so superficial as the title, but you can take testing to a really powerful level as you do this. And there are one or two other points that aren't really questions or not necessarily relevant for this, and I'm happy to talk to folks offline. And one was how to scale my business. Certainly, it's gonna start with understanding who you're selling to and what's important to them and what they'll respond to and opt into. Critical to all of that. I hope you found this helpful. I'm just going to check. There is one question here, and this is from Mindy. Thank you, Mindy. Would you recommend switching digital signage offers as a viable test, or do you think the bait is better presented, shared as an in-person conversation? So excuse me for turning my head, but I've got a second screen here. So yeah, I think testing, there's no wrong answer for testing as long as it's something that that you find is reliable. So digital signage can be, it's very similar to online testing. It's, it's getting people to opt into that. You could certainly have digital signage at events, but ultimately you're putting out a piece of bait, and you're somewhat trying to figure out who's swimming to it, and is that person that's swimming to it or attracted to it, and is anyone attracted to it? But are they the ones we want to attract? And again, why we see so often, we walk, we're in trade shows, almost on a daily basis, the most common offer is people giving away iPads or something similar, and it's the most goofy thing, because the best they can do is to get essentially attract someone that would be an average attendee, certainly not a prospect. Because we're friends, we've already agreed that a prospect has a need, they have money, and they're absolutely urgent. I mean, like their house is burning down. That's a prospect. Anyone short of that is a suspect, and maybe somebody we'll talk to in a year when their house is on fire. But we want people whose house is on fire, and that's whatever lead marketing we do should be much more tuned to find prospects, and A/B testing is a really good way to do it. And digital signage is one of many tools. The challenge of that we talked about is we don't have the opportunity to ask questions. When somebody opts in at an event, we can ask, gosh, thank you, and we'll get you enrolled. What is it particularly about this that's attractive for you or important? And likewise, when somebody doesn't opt in, we ask the reverse question. What is it you're challenged by? Certainly this isn't, but what is it you're challenged by? So hopefully this has been helpful. It's been a real pleasure to chat with you all today. I really appreciate people taking time out. I'm just checking for other questions. I don't see others. I'm going to sign off here, but it's been a pleasure. We'll follow up with an email. Please let us know how we can help you, what additional questions you have. We're happy to talk about specific scenarios that anyone has, but we certainly wish you all great success, great marketing. Again, my name's Bill Kenny. Our company is Meet. If you would like this on YouTube, join our channel. You'll get up-to-date info on all the things we're doing. But again, really appreciate your time today, and we'll talk to you all soon. Bye for now.